Okay, let's start. Welcome to the morning session of today. The first speaker is Charlotte Christiansen, and she's going to talk about exact methods for top-line results for superdimensions. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at this interesting conference in this amazing city. It's really been a pleasure. So let me say I'm cheating a little bit with respect to the theme of the workshop because my low-dimensional system will be offline, but it's embedded in a four-dimensional quantum field theory. And also I'll be mostly reporting on some results obtained by exact methods and not so much about the methods themselves. And what I will be is based on two papers that were written together with Konstantin Zarembo. Okay. So in this audience where we all know mathematical physics, I think we all have many motivations for studying, but I can't resist mentioning one which was contained in a citation by Joe Polchinski at the Dirac Centennial Symposium 25 years ago, where he said that the existence of magnetic monopoles seems the same that one can make about physics not yet. And the 't Hooft line is of course the world line of a magnetic monopole. So what I will do is actually to consider a four-dimensional quantum field theory which involves both a monopole and a Higgs particle. So I could it has some experimental relevance if it will be embedded in n equals 4 else. So my main motivation for studying this system is that it provides us with a novel example of a defect CFT based on n equals 4, which will turn out to be integrable in the sense that you can compute all its one-point functions in it's a defect CFT which is of codimension, and for the right choice of parameters it will also be a half BPS configuration. And in connection with the theme of the workshop, it is amenable to many exact methods, not only integrability but also to localization, to the bound bootstrap program, although this has not really been implemented yet. It might also give us some new insights on S-duality, because n equals 4 super-Yang-Mills has this S-duality, which is a duality under exchange of magnetic and electric fields, and solve the 't Hooft line exactly. Let's learn something about Wilson lines, which are objects to 't Hooft lines. So let's see. So what I will do in the talk is first to introduce this monopole Higgs, and then I will turn to reporting some results which were obtained not by my group but localization. And these localization results, they give some really curious predictions for the perturbative content or the perturbative correlation, the theory that I would like to understand in more detail. And that is one of the reasons why I want honest field theory computation, where I quantize around the monopole configuration to see what is happening. But of course, the motivation is not only to reproduce something which is already known, because I trust people doing localization, but to be able to completely solve the theory in its full rigor, or what to say. And as we will see, the quantization background involves some really beautiful quantum mechanical problems which can be solved exactly, and they allow me to explore various features that you discover when studying localization. So by this quantization I will confirm the prediction and then also interpret the results in a nice way, I think, by a summary and an outlook. Okay, so first the setup. So a magnetic monopole is an object which magnetic charge, and it gives rise to a radial magnetic type here. And here I have set all the constants of nature equal to 1, including the electric charge. And in that convention, the quantization condition for the monopole tells me that this constant b here has to be an integer. As I said, the 't Hooft loop is simply the world line of a monopole. Choose the monopole to be static at the origin, so it's a defect in time. the quantization condition for the monopole was worked out all the way back 31 by Dirac and takes this form here. But as I said, in my convention, this constant here, B has to be an integer. And sometimes I will denote B over 2 as Q, the monopole charge. In the field language, a monopole is a so-called operator where you have a singular configuration of the gauge field, which gives rise to the monopole field, and perform your path integral over fields which obey this boundary condition on the gauge. And one way to choose a gauge field to produce a monopole field is this one here. So you see that it's a singular when theta is equal to pi, but not at theta equals. And well, you can define another version which has the opposite property, that it's non-singular at theta equals pi, and then it's related by a gauge transformation in the region where the two are both well defined. This is an old story which is well defined, and that's actually one of the ways that you can get direct quantization coming out. Okay, so so this is how it works in normal electromagnetism when you introduce them. Now I want to introduce it in n equals 4 super young Mills. Of course, in n equals 4 super young Mills, I have a non-abelian field theory, and all my fields are adjoint fields of size n times n if I use gauge group un or sun. So the constant B that I had in front of my classical gauge field has to be in matrix. But I also want to introduce it in a way that I keep the maximum amount of supersymmetries. And to do that, I have to also classical expectation value to a scalar field. So I simply just associate this classical value to the scalars. But I will actually do it in the simplest possible way. So I'll take the B to just be a B field where I have only one non-vanishing component in this upper left-hand corner here. I can do it if I have a gauge un, because this guy here has to be in the Cartan of the gauge group. And then the simplest case for the scalar, I will just take it to be the 6 scalars, which has a non-vanishing vacuum expectation value. These classical fields, they depend on the distance to the defect. R is the distance to the defect, and this precise scaling of the classical fields is what renders the theory a conformal field theory, a defect conformal field theory. And as I said, with assignments of classical fields, one can conserve half of the supersymmetries. And the setup in total constitutes a one-dimensional defect CFT. Conformal field theory is conserved on the defect. And yeah, it's codimension 3. Okay. Yeah, so for this system, there are kind of 2 dualities at play. First, there's the ADS-CFT duality, which says that this system is actually to a probe D1, D3 brane system, where the is embedded in the usual ADS5 times S5 background in such a way that it shares a line with our 4-dimensional Minkowski space, and that is what generates the Hopf line.
Sorry, good question. The supersymmetry doesn't depend on the U1 you chose.
You can of course rotate this vacuum expectation value to some other point on the sphere. It should be the same. Okay. So Degel and Oos, they have a number of integrable boundary conditions for probe brane setups, and this one here is in the list. And therefore we expect that this defect should likewise be integrable in the sense that its one-point function should be computable in closed form. Okay, so but here there's another duality at play, namely S-duality. And that's a duality between electric and metals. Under that duality, a Wilson loop is mapped to a de Hopf loop, but quantities without electric or magnetic properties, such as chiral primary fields, are just invariant. And the duality comes to a translation of the coupling constant. It's not just a weak strong coupling duality. It also involves the large n limits, which makes it a bit non-trivial than normal. So because of this duality here, if we have some exact results for Wilson loops, we can get some exact predictions for the Hopf loops, data with chiral primaries. And there are actually such results for expectation values of chiral primaries in the background of a Wilson loop, and we can use that to get predictions for the same correlation function in the previous loop. And of course, localization only works for protected quantities. If you really want to have new correlation functions of non-protected quantities, then you have to resort to integrability. And some of our work comes into play. Okay. So what I will be looking at is correlators between this 't Hooft loop and the chiral primary. And due to conformal invariance, it's bound to take this form here, where delta is the conformal dimension of the operator that I insert in the background of the Wilson loop. And to begin with, let me look at operators like the simplest possible chiral primary, which is just a trace of some complex L. And actually, the expectation value of this operator in the background of a Wilson loop is known exactly from a localization computation. So, of course, the localization was prescribed by Pesto originally, but for this particular setup, it was worked out by Okayama and Simonov. And they simply show that all orders in lambda and all orders in n, the function is given by this expression here, where the L's are Laguerre polynomials. And this is actually for a chiral primary at the center of the Wilson loop. And of course, this is something which we can use to get a prediction for what the correlation function with the Hooft loop should look like. Okay, again, it gives some testable prediction for the one-point function of protected operators, but for operators we don't get anything, then we have to use integrability. But now let me look at what you actually get from this computation. Okay, so as I said, S-duality, it fixes strong weak coupling and large n. So it's not completely trivial to get in for the 't Hooft loop. But what you can do is to use an integral representation of the Laguerre polynomials and then do a large n saddle point approximation. Then you will get a result in the large n limit, but it contains all powers of the coupling constant. That we have done together with Konstantin, and that results in this expression here for the one-point function. So there's this space-time dependence which is necessary, and then there are these two terms here. And they are quite simple. You can expand, of course, in lambda for small lambda and see what the derivative series look like. And people coming from integrability will probably recognize that this looks like something which consists of wrapping corrections and non-wrapping corrections. So to those who don't come from that community, wrapping corrections are corrections which correspond to Feynman diagrams which involve all fields in the operator, while the non-wraps do not. Okay, but we can try to expand this for small lambda, and with the first term again is very simple, just looks like this. You can also see that it's easy to recover at least the leading order term here, because I just have to insert the classical value of the scalar field, which was in my units 1/2r, and that gives this prefactor. Then there's something coming from the normalization, and then the 1. So the normalization works, but if you want to check the higher, then you really have to quantize the theory around the monopole background and do an honest conservative computation. Okay, so try to see how that works. But before quantizing, we look a little bit about at the structure of the higher loop corrections, because you can of course try to expand this one-point function for various operators of varying length. So subscript here is a length, and this is the space-time independent part of the one-point functions. And here I have given the part coming from the first term in the expression in black, and the part coming from the second term in the expansion in blue. And one observes a quite curious structure here. All the point functions have a perturbative series which terminates after a finite number of terms. Quite unusual. Of course, you sometimes see it in localization, but here there's nothing more than these few first terms. But then, even length of the one-point function, there will be additional terms coming from the second term, and they actually start out exactly at order lambda to the 2 characteristic of wrapping corrections, which involve all fields. So the non-wrapping part truncates for all L. And this is actually a structure one sees in different defect setups, also for the D3 probrane setup, and for Gucher-Witten defects, that you have actually truncation without any wrapping corrections, which is even more simple. It was actually something which triggered our investigations here. But what I would like to do is to try to understand where non-wrapping corrections come from. I can do that with perturbation theory, of course, and then it would be to try and understand these wrapping corrections, which is an eternal problem in integrability. Okay. Understand the perturbative series. I need to quantize, but first say that I can actually write down a closed form of these non-wrapping corrections, those which terminate. And it's simply a finite power series, as I said. And then it terminates at the order which is L over 2, where L is an operator. It has some perturbation, some coupling constant dependent term here, and then there's some combinatorial factor. And we want to recover this expression quantizing around the monopole. And as a future, we would also like to understand the remaining part, which comes from wrapping corrections. Okay. Yes, so around the monopole configuration, it's in principle a textbook exercise, but it's a little bit involved. So you have to expand around the classical fields and look at the fluctuations. Of course, there will be some cast term which mixes the fields, and you have to diagonalize it. So my classical fields, they had only a non-vanishing in the upper left-hand corner. So if I write them in this form here, there will be a part in the lower right-hand corner which are not affected by the classical wefs, and then there will be a small part in the upper left-hand corner which is also not affected, actually. But these parts in the first row and the first column, they are heavily affected by the classical fields. Okay, then I expand. I get a new, rather complicated quadratic part of the action, which I need to invert to find my propagators. But first, to gauge fix, that's a story in itself, and I'm not going to that. To invert the quadratic part of the action and determine the propagator, I actually have to solve some very, very acute quantum mechanics which can be solved exactly. So just to make it clear, if I write my classical quadratic part, or not classical, if I write the quadratic part of my action for some fields phi in this way here, propagator at this place, then I can find my propagator by solving the problem for this operator d to the minus 1 here, and then do a spectral sum over eigenvalues and eigenfunctions as a classical way to find the propagator. And that is, of course, just a quantum mechanical problem. You need to diagonalize some operator, finds its eigenvalues and eigenfunctions. And that then is relevant only for these field components in the first row and the first column. Okay, and what do these quantum mechanical problems look like? Well, they're actually very, very nice. They depend a little bit on the fields. There are some fields for which the problem simplifies. They are classical fields which don't get wefs, and one part of the gauge field are ghost fields. And for those fields, I simply have to solve the problem which consists of having a scalar particle in a monopole potential. And that is actually exactly what Dirac solved in 1931. And there are some really beautiful papers, both from the 30s and the 40s, which solve this in I mean, they knew exactly the same language as we do today. It's really curious that it's 100, and it's very, very clear. Okay, so that is solved, and you can find the propagators by spectral resumation. Then there's the propagators for the A field components. For that case, you have to solve a problem which consists of a scalar in a monopole potential, but coupled to a spin 1 part. And that has actually not really been solved before, or it had not been solved. But the spin 1 particle alone was considered by Olsen, Osland, and Wu in 1990. But it turns out when you couple, which we're doing here because of supersymmetry, then you actually get a neater problem. The solution is more beautiful, which I think reflects the underlying interoperability and eventually the underlying supersymmetry. For the fermions, there's also a quantum mechanical problem, and that consists of fermions in some non-potential. The standard case was solved back in '77 by these people, but in this case we have a non-standard potential because we have coupling to the scalar. But again, it can be solved exactly. Okay. Yeah. So I will not go through the solution, although it's very beautiful. But as I said, you find the eigenvalues and the eigenfunction, and you do this spectral resumation. So scalar propagator for those that I called easy fields look like. And I show it because it has some really nice symmetries that you could have expected. So first of all, the whole problem, it has a flavor of a particle in a central potential, of course, and you can introduce some angular momentum operators with the usual SU2 commutation relation that allow you to diagonalize the problem. But in this case, as we all know in school, that some of the angular momentum is actually carried by the magnetic field here. So there is a spectral flow, so that a scalar particle actually has a half-integer angular momentum in a monopole potential. But otherwise, you solve in terms of some spherical harmonics, which are not the usual spherics, but so-called monopole spherical harmonics, and they involve Jacobi polynomials instead of Laguerre polynomials. So that takes care of the physical part, and then there's a radial and time-dependent part, which is taken care of by some Bessel functions. And so here in the denominator are the eigenvalues, the time part coming from the time-dependent part and the space-dependent part, and we have to integrate over all these eigenvalues and sum over most. And that can actually be simplified. You can do the integral, and you can do the sum, and then you end up with some mode decomposition, so to say, where the angular part is taken care of by these Jacobi polynomials, and then the space-time part, the radius, the distance to the defect, and the time is actually in ADS2 propagator, which is actually exactly what you would expect from the system. You have this 't Hooft line, and it effectively behaves as a ADS2 space. So you get an ADS2 propagator and then times some spherical part. And it's very nice to see it coming out from the actual quantum mechanical computations. And everything is known in closed form, and you can also dimensionally regularize and consider this in ADS D dimensions instead of ADS2. Okay. Then there were some complicated fields where you have a large degree of mixing, namely between the scalar and field. And you have to write down what is the mixing matrix for these fields. So this is what it looks like. And it's a 4x4 matrix. There's one scalar and 3 components of the gauge field here. And it's a quantum mechanical problem. You start from some system of just the scalar with half-integer angular momenta. You add a particle with angular momentum 1 or spin 1, and then you know what the good quantum numbers are, namely the sum. And this time you do a mode expansion to diagonalize this problem here, inspired by the simple problem that we solved. So you expand on the scalar part on monocole spherical harmonics, and the vector part you expand on vector monopole spherical harmonics. So there are some combinations of spherical harmonics with spin 1 representations. So there are 3 constants here for a given value of j. And then you assume again that the radial part is given by some Bessel function with some index nu. And you answer into this equation up here. And then it's an eigenvalue equation, which give you possible values of nu, the index of the Bessel functions, and then these expansion coefficients here. And it all looks pretty complicated. It's full of 3J, 6J symbols and so on. But if you look at it carefully, then it turns out that the possible indices of the Bessel functions are very neat. Just these 3 possible values for a given value of the total angular momentum. And that's actually interesting to contrast it with there's no scalar present, where you just have the spin 1 particle. You have only 3 values of this nu, of course, but they're not very pretty. They're actually irrational values, and you cannot write things in a nice enclosed form. But because of this to the scalar, then you get very pretty values coming out, and everything and looks very pretty. And as I say, I think this simple spectrum is a manifestation of the underlying integrability. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, we had this before. We had the propagator for a simple scalar. Now we need the propagator for this scalar which mixes with the gauge field. And again, it will have some part which of the angular dependence, which is given by Jacobi polynomials. And this time it will have 3 different propagators appearing because there were these 3 possible values for the index of the Bessel function, the nu from before. And again, it's a mode sum where it's an infinite sum over all half integer values of j. But when you need to compute 1-point functions for this complex field set, then you need a propagator for a combination of scalar fields, phi 1 plus I phi 2, where phi 1 is simple, and 2 is complicated, and you need it at coinciding points. And that gives a lot of simplifications. First of all, you get a difference between 2 propagators. One is simple and one is complicated. So you need something we call G minus, which is the difference between these 2 propagators. And then for the one at coinciding points. So this is an operator with all the fields sticking out. Most of them you replace by their vefs, and then you make one contraction by one. And that propagator is a difference between 2 types of propagators. And when you try to compute it explicitly, and eventually we want to set the 2 endpoints of the propagator equal to each other, if you first make the identification of the angular coordinates, then already you have a really huge simplification. The big sum over angular momenta telescopes, and you are left only with 2 terms. So 2 ADS propagators which correspond to 2 different mode numbers. And as you see, when the monopole charge go to 0, then you don't, because then both fields have the same standard 4-dimensional scalar. But if you send the 2 fields to coincide and you go to 4 dimensions, then the resulting effective propagator is simply non-singular and 1 over 8 pi squared. Which is extremely simple coming out of this long computation. And there's an interesting thing to note, namely that up here you can send q to 0 and you get 0, but limit does not commute with the limit down here where you send the points close to each other. Then you remain with this type here, with this term here. Okay, so that term is exactly what we need to compute that pole, which will be the simplest correction to the 1-point function. So it gives me this factor here, and then times lambda over, I think it's 2. So all in all, a tadpole will simply give me this computation, and the tadpole will give me the simplest correction to the 1. Okay. Yeah. And now I can actually easily find out what are the origin of these non-wrapping corrections that I listed in the beginning. So here is again this sum of non-wrapping corrections, which was finite at the order which was a length over 2. So you see that the last part here, which is coupling constant dependent, that's exactly the tadpole. And then this combinatorial factor here, it actually just counts in how many different ways you can insert n tadpole operator. You can see it if you take your operator, you cut it open at some point, and then you're instructed to contract neighboring points, or deciding what is easier to draw them like this. And you have to contract neighbors. You need a large n limit to work out correctly. So this type of contract the first and the last point gives just this binomial factor, and then you get a similar factor if you contract the first and the last field. And you can convince yourself exactly what you do when you do the perturbative computation. So what we can conclude is that these non-wrapping corrections, they come exactly from contractions which only involve tadpoles. And that is a little bit curious, because there are potentially many other Feynman that would contribute. There are many Feynman diagrams with internal loops and internal, basically infinitely many, but apparently they all cancel out, and contributions from these types of diagrams, which you can describe them as flower diagrams with a varying number of leaves. And that's simply all. For some reason, all other terms disappear. As I already mentioned, you observe the same phenomenon in the DC-85 program system, and also in the Gucker-Witten defects. There's even no wrappings. Okay, so we've understood most of coming from localization. So let me see what we have understood. Yes, so we have obtained this new example of a defect CFT, which can be treated by localization and integrability, and which is of codimension 3. And we have completed its quantization, and of course we have a good check that it's correct, that it reproduces all these things from localization. And we've observed this intriguing structure of perturbation theory, of which we have now understood more or less half. Then it was all about protected operators, and I chose not to talk about the non-protected ones, but we can get them from integrability. At the lowest order, we have in the paper with Kostya a closed form for all one-point functions. Actually, by doing some kind of bootstrap integrability, also get them to higher loop orders, at least up to some dressing phase, and that was done by Gomber and Beinecke. With this quantization, the scene is set for the full solution by integrability, where we can presumably determine this missing factor from the Beinecke-Gomber paper, and then also the wrapping corrections. Yes, and that actually leads me already to my one of my conclusions is that monopoles are very fascinating, also in N=4. So what we really want to do in the future is to these wrapping corrections. This was an everlasting problem from integrability. Of course, with the full quantization in place, we can extract, in principle, all other kinds of correlation functions we like, all kinds of conformal data, but to boundary couplings, 2-point functions, transport coefficients, and in principle get the conformal boundary program going. And finally, I got a little bit obsessed by monoples. I think it would be interesting to study also in other dimensions and other. Okay, thank you very much for.